My wife and I were driving with our daughters to get some ice cream. Across from the store there was a cemetery. None of us really gave it much thought since the city had quite a few of them, so cemeteries near restaurants were nothing out of the ordinary. After we finished eating, we started our drive back home. By now it was later in the evening and the sun was setting. I just happened to glance over at the cemetery when something caught my attention. There was a large group of people gathered around one of the graves. I don't mean like 5 or 6 people. There were around 30 of them. We got in the car and started driving down the road. I looked at my wife and said, "That's an odd time of day to be having a funeral, huh?" She looked puzzled. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "The people that were standing around the grave in the cemetery. That big group of people," I said. She looked at me now like I was crazy. "I didn't see anyone," she said. "Did you see any cars?" "No," I said. I spun the car around and drove back to the cemetery, only now it was completely empty. I found the grave where I'd seen the group of people gathered. It was a fresh grave, a child's grave. This happened when I was a teenager. My parents had remodeled their basement and turned it into a separate living area, complete with couches, chairs, a TV, barroom, and bathroom. I spent a lot of time down there watching TV, playing video games, and even sleeping. I had to share a room in the upstairs with my brother, which was kind of small, so I preferred to just stay downstairs. One night, I was laying down on one of the small couches inside the barroom, and before you jump to conclusions, let me add that I've never taken alcohol or used drugs. I had a blanket covering my body and head, something I've done since childhood, as it's the only way I could ever fall asleep. I was still wide awake at this time and just trying to get myself to doze off. It was then that I noticed a sound. It was a slow, shuffling sound. The sound your feet make as you walk on carpet, and the change in pressure on the floor as you walk. This wasn't the sound someone makes when walking into a room to ask how your day was. This was the sound of slow, calculated footsteps. The kind you'd make when you want to sneak up on someone. I immediately felt uneasy. There was a sense of panic taking over. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was my brother coming down to play a prank on me. I was just about to tell him to leave me alone when there was another sound. A low, dull, raspy sound. The sound you make when you've had the wind knocked out of you and you're gasping for air. It was coming from whoever it was that was in the room with me. My heart was now pounding in my chest as I felt the pressure of hands and fingers on the blanket. I felt the blanket being gripped and then slowly tugged. I tried to keep my grip on the blanket to keep my head covered to stop me from seeing whoever it was. It seems childish, I know, but I was terrified. I had finally had enough, and in a sudden move, fueled by the adrenaline rush that had taken over, I flung the blanket off and dashed up the stairs into the living room. It was there that I saw my mom sitting on the couch watching TV. My brother was sitting on the floor. I gave him an accusatory look and said, "That wasn't even funny. What were you trying to do? Give me a heart attack?" He looked confused, and so did our mom. She looked at me and said, "What are you talking about?" I told her what had just happened. She looked even more confused now, pointed to my brother and said, "He's been sitting here with me all night." We were kids at the time, and a bunch of friends came over to my house to have a sleepover. It was just us kids and my mom. My father was still at work and wasn't due home for a few more hours. I had pretty strict parents growing up, and they didn't want me watching certain types of movies, listening to music with profanity, or even playing video games that were even slightly violent. I knew my friends would be bored if we didn't have anything fun to do the whole night, so I grabbed some board games to play and set them up in the living room. I felt kind of lame spreading out board games on the floor in front of my friends, when most kids our age would be up all night playing video games or watching horror movies. I felt even more lame having my mom sitting there on the sofa while we tried choosing which 30-year-old board game to play. I want to add that we all lived in a relatively quiet town. It wasn't a super small town or anything like that, and you could still find it on a map. But it was safe. I always told myself it was safe. It was later in the night and we were all getting bored playing Monopoly. My friends looked like they wanted to call their parents and be taken home. I couldn't really blame them. If they never spoke to me again after that, it really wouldn't surprise me. I had just started to pack up the game when we heard the patio door sliding open. We all looked on in horror as a tall man wearing a mask stepped inside the living room. He raised his arm and pointed at my mom. In a slow, deep voice, he said her name. He then lowered his arm and stepped back out into the night. We called the police, but by this time he was already long gone. Whoever this man was, he knew my mom's name, and he knew where we lived. A few weeks later, my mom got a telephone call at the house from a blocked number. When she answered, a slow, deep voice spoke on the other end. He said only 4 words before hanging up. Do you miss me?